Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Rumcast. We are the podcast that talks all things rum related with the people who love and shape it. My name is John Gulla, and co-piloting this podcast with me is none other than one Mr. Will Hookinga. Will, I know you're excited to share the details and the setup for our interview today with Mark Reynier and Jane Nurse from Renegade Rum, which we actually had to break it up into two parts because it was so full of information.
Yeah.
But first, I wanted to kind of mention that since we do record these ahead of time, Will, I'm imagining that right now, as this episode is being released, we are both living it up at the Miami Rum Congress, which is this weekend, February, I think it's the 10th through the 12th, and enjoying some rum and talking to some rum folks there and hopefully having a really good time.
Yeah, I'm picturing myself with that warm Atlantic breeze, blowing through my hair in the midst of February. It is the Atlantic, right? Miami is it's on the Atlantic side. It's not on the Gulf side, right? Okay.
No, it counts as the Atlantic side. Yeah,
okay.
Totally.
Forgive my Florida geography knowledge there, but yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. It's the middle of February, so it's a perfect time for me to travel from Nashville down to Miami and hopefully avoid some cold weather up here. But more importantly, get to spend some time together in person, get to see some of the rum fam out there. And I know we've talked to a few listeners already who are going to be out there. If anyone listening is planning to be there, definitely say hello. It'd be great to have a chat, have a little drink together, enjoy some rum, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, agreed. If you see us there, don't be shy. Stop us. If you don't know what we look like, head to the website. If you see our pictures there, I'll probably be wearing the same hat, and we'll be around. So please come up and say hi. Definitely. So Will, I know there was also another. We got an email from a listener, who was responding to one of the things we talked about last episode about bottle placement on shelves. So.
Right. You brought up an odd bottle placement story. I always love these odd bottle placement stories where you're in a store perusing the rum section and you see something somewhere that just doesn't belong, and you shared your experience of that. It was like a ultra super mega premium display case, and what was in it again? What was the lineup?
With Boom Boo in the middle of it. So
and
it was
what was it in between?
It was like Mount Gay port cask or something along those lines, and then I think it had some ECS series from Foursquare and some other really really high end rums from Bacardi. But like the Boom Boo there stuck out to me between those two especially, and I was like, oh my goodness, I cannot believe, inside a glass case, mind you.
Right. So a real one of these things is not like the other situation, even just talking about by price, so anyway, we got an email from John up in Maine, and he shared one that honestly, this one might be even funny. Maybe it's because he actually sent a picture, so I really got the full effect. But it's an image, and you always get to the part of the rum section where it transitions from actual rum to the spice rums and Malibu and things like that. So it's that section. You've got a row of Captain Morgan. You've got the bottom shelf is kind of Malibu down there, and some like flavored Bacardis and stuff. Then at the top, you've got your premium spiced rums. You've got your Sailor Jerry, your Kraken Black Roast, and they're nestled in between the liter handle of Sailor Jerry and the smaller Kraken is one bottle of Foursquare Isonomy, which it's just a great image. Maybe we'll have to ask John if we can post this on Instagram or something. It'd be a great one. But I was thinking to myself, how does this happen? I'm curious. Did you have any theories, John? I had one that I floated in our email reply to John. That he's Jon, you're John. So did you have any theories?
No.
So I'll share my theory.
Okay.
My theory is that this bottle is something that someone at the store was trying to save for someone else, but someone who's into rum and was hey, hit it. I saw you guys have Isonomy. I'll be there next week. Can you hold it for me? And so maybe it's a situation where whoever at the store, they couldn't actually just take it off the shelf and put it in the back. Maybe they have some kind of policy against that. But what they could do is hide it in plain sight, John. So if you want to hide something in plain sight, an expensive high-end rum that rum enthusiasts are after, where would you hide it? But in between the Sailor Jerry's and the Kraken. It's
or
kind
in the
of
vodka section. I mean,
that's true. But see, you can't be too obvious with it, because then some other employee is going to come through and be like,
what is this doing here?
What the hell is this rum doing in the vodka
Yeah.
section? So
That's true.
It's kind of a diabolically brilliant plan, I think, in that case. So
Yeah.
I can't think of any other explanation. But like I said, I love seeing these photos of odd placement. And we've had some conversations in the past, too, of like, what is the ideal way to organize a rum section? Because I feel like the way most are is pretty dissatisfying, and that's probably a whole other conversation for another episode.
We could talk about that for a long time.
Yeah. But yeah, if you have any funny bottle placement photos to share, definitely send us an email, host@rumcast.com. Maybe we can get a whole like collage of them to share via Instagram or something like that. That would be fun. But John, with all that out of the way, this episode will be part 1 of 2. This actually ended up being we set our own personal record for longest interview time. It was a solid 3-hour interview. Now, like once we, edit and stuff, it'll probably not come to 3 hours total runtime combined, but
we keep it lean for you.
We do, yeah. I feel like we're pretty generous, and we don't. It's not like we edit out a ton of stuff.
No, not
because
at all.
we're. I think we err on the side of including too much in our interviews. But 3 hours is a lot. So we did want to split this up into a part 1 and part 2, and it also had a very just kind of like good natural conclusion for part 1 leading into part 2. But as you said, we talked to Mark Reynier and Jane Nurse. Mark is the founder and CEO of Renegade Rum Distillery. Jane is their environmental compliance and public relations officer. But she described herself as a Swiss Army knife. She kind of does a little bit of everything. And I was really happy to get both of them, because I felt they both brought really interesting different perspectives to the interview. And I always love when we're able to do that. But if you're unfamiliar with Renegade Rum Distillery, this is, at this point, it's not brand new, but in terms of like, rum distilleries out there, it's one of the newest, maybe the newest rum distillery of its size in the Caribbean. And it was built completely from the ground up in Grenada. They're making fresh cane juice rum. They're growing all of the sugarcane themselves. And the first time that I like really started to kind of look at this distillery and be like, whoa, like something's going on here, was when I really got a sense of the scale of what they're doing. So it's not, just a small craft distillery or something like that. It's a sizable operation. Like they planted hundreds of acres of sugarcane. I think 14 different farms they're up to now, or somewhere close. Maybe it'll be at 14 soon. They've got a 10,000 liter pot still, a big twin column still, so they can do a variety of all these distillates. And then the other factor is Mark Reynier's involvement, which, if you're unfamiliar with him, that means you're probably, kind of like me, just a rum enthusiast. But if you're someone who is into whiskey as well, you may already be familiar with Mark. He's very big in the whiskey world. He was part of the team that restarted, I guess, Bruichladdich Distillery in Scotland, kind of an old defunct Scotch distillery that they reopened. I think that was around 2000 or so, right, John? Sometime?
Yeah, I think that's right. 2000, 2001, and around
the turn of the century. It feels so weird to say that about 2000.
The Y2K bug.
Yeah, exactly. So he did that. More recently, he started a brand new place in Ireland called Waterford, which is a single malt Irish whiskey distillery. And the idea behind these distilleries, which I'm bringing up because it's relevant to, Renegade is kind of a continuation of the philosophy behind those distilleries. But if we're painting in broad strokes, like kind of what they did with those distilleries was, instead of sourcing barley from all these other places around the world, like my understanding is that's what most whiskey distilleries do. They kind of source barley wherever they can get it. It's not like they're growing it in their backyard or anything. He wanted to grow or partner with local growers and source all locally grown barley, and then track which farm it came from. So you'd have these different releases where It may have been distilled the same way, fermented the same way, but the barley came from a different place. And you would see that on your bottle. And the whole idea was based around the concept of terroir and spirits, and trying to show that just like how that's thought of in wine, it can apply to distilled spirits as well. The place where your base material is grown dramatically affects the output at the end when you get in the bottle, and being able to taste the differences and see how the land impacts flavor. And so that is kind of the similar blueprint they're following with Renegade. And like I said, they have 14 different farms, and I believe their first releases started coming out, it may have been like late 2021 or possibly 2022. I can't remember. I think it was 2021 where their first unaged rums were released. And if you've seen the photos, or if you've seen them in person, they're these, really bright, vibrant, colored bottles. They kind of stick with you once you see what they look like. They're pretty unique. And on the back, they have this thing called a cane code where you can punch it in on their website, and it's like, here's the exact farm and field on the farm where the cane that went into this rum was grown. And so the idea is, over time, you'll be able to taste all these various different terroirs. Terroir. I never know how to pronounce these. There's two things that show me all the time how little French I know. One is doing this podcast, and the other one is doing crossword puzzles, where they will occasionally have clues that really, you need to know something in French, and I'm just shit out of luck completely on all those. So anyway, however you pronounce it, that's kind of the big focus behind this project. So A, the size, the scale, B, fresh sugarcane, investing big in sugarcane, like all these things are super interesting stuff that we talk about all the time on the show.
Yeah. I think it's like you're saying, it's really important that they're focusing on the terroir, and that is the vision behind what they're doing here. Like you said, the history that leads up to that, but just how they're highlighting all of that and giving that information over. And we talk a lot about that in the transparency down to very specific details of what's going into that bottle is a really cool thing. It sounds like they're here to stay. They've got a lot going on, and a lot that they talk about what their plan is in the long-term strategy, right? Which was really cool to hear also. So
yeah, that's the other part of it that is so interesting to me, is like new projects of this scale built from scratch with someone investing so much into rum don't come around that often. So it's always interesting to get the story. But so part one, it's really kind of the making of the project and the distillery. So there were tons of these wild ups and downs along the way. I mean, the pandemic happened like right around when they were supposed to start distilling, which obviously really complicated things. So it was really interesting to get both Jane and Mark's perspectives on that, the process, and also of someone, from outside the country coming in and doing this huge project there, which can arise suspicions. And Jane's from Grenada, so she was able to kind of bring a voice to that. And then part two is going to go deeper into the rum production itself, what kind of drove their stylistic decisions, what the longer term roadmap looks like. There's some really interesting stuff they're doing with aging, and their first aged releases have just started coming out, but what they're releasing now and what they aim to be releasing, there's going to be a big difference. And so we get into all that, but I'm interested to see where things go, because one thing that comes through, I think, in this interview a lot is Mark is very, very confident about their approach. And like, he even used the word arrogant, I think, to describe himself, or at least, maybe how other people see it. But I mean, his whole philosophy, to me seems to be, he is coming in as an outsider and he wants to retain that perspective. And you kind of get that a little bit in the name itself. Renegade, implies maybe being wanting to be seen that way. But like, he's made it clear, like, he's not interested in what other rum producers are doing. They want to just like come in, total blank slate approach, not influenced by others. And there's like kind of two sides to that coin. There's like, if you take that approach, it's possible you arrive at your own super unique way of doing things, like something people truly haven't seen before because you ignored everything else that's out there.
Right.
The other side of the coin is you can end up making mistakes that other people have already done. And so I think like the proof will ultimately be in the pudding and how everything, tastes at the end of the day. And so I'm just really excited to see how all that plays out. And it was good to get the story and learn more. So I'm excited for people to hear it.
Well, why don't we just take a quick break, and coming up next, it'll be our interview part 1 with Mark Reynier and Jane Nurse. Hey, rum fans. Looking for an easy way to stay informed about what's going on in the rum industry? If so, head over to therumlab.com, where you can keep up with everything going on in the rum scene. From their detailed infographics that do a deep dive into individual rum expressions, to their weekly rum newsletter, to live streams with many of the most recognizable names in rum, there's always something new to learn. And you can find out more info on their annual rum events happening across the United States, including the Miami Rum Congress, New York Rum Fest, Chicago Rum Fest, LA Rum Fest, and the San Francisco Rum Fest. Visit therumlab.com and sign up today to receive their newsletter so you don't miss any of what's happening or what's coming up soon. That's therumlab.com. Now back to the show.
All right, we are here with 2 guests on this episode of the Rumcast. First of all, we have the founder and CEO of Renegade Rum Distillery in Grenada. He's also the founder of Waterford Whiskey Distillery in Ireland, former head of Bruichladdich Distillery in Scotland, 20 years or so in wine before that, I believe, as well. I want to make sure I get all the titles right, the resume right. But I have a new title for you, Mark, after reading about you and everything. I want to introduce you as the superstar of terroir. That's what I feel like is befitting.
Okay,
Jane's giving 2 thumbs up.
Call me something else, but that would do. Yeah.
And we also have the official Swiss Army knife of Renegade Rum Distillery, Jane Nurse. She is also the environmental compliance and public relations officer. I can't wait to get into all the ins and outs of what you do for Renegade, Jane, because it sounds like you're covering a lot of ground. But thank you both for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having
us, guys.
So one thing I wanted to get out of the way at the beginning, Mark, I've been kind of consuming a ton of interviews you've done over the years this week, and I noticed that many of them where you've discussed Renegade are either in whiskey-related podcasts, whiskey-related magazines, YouTube channels, which makes sense given your background. But I wanted to assure both of you today that you are among people who speak the language of rum. So you don't have to translate. You won't have to try to convince us that yes, rum actually can be really good. So
lovely. That sounds exciting.
Yeah, I was thinking back. I remember the first time I really got a sense of the scale of Renegade, what y'all were doing. Worspa did a series of live streams where Matt Petrick interviewed different producers from throughout the Caribbean, and he brought on your head distiller, Devin Date, along with Graham Williams and Bertrand John, and they went deep through all the aspects of farming, production, and all that stuff. And that's when I was like, okay, like, wow, this isn't just a whiskey producer who's kind of dipping a toe into rum. Like you've got both feet in, your head's under the water, you've like dived all the way in. So I wanted to start with just what pushed you to enter the category as a distiller, because I know you had experience doing some independent bottlings of rum for a while. I can't remember if that's when you were still with Bruichladdich or if that was afterward, but
it was.
There's a big difference between, just kind of sourcing and bottling some rum and like going all in, building this distillery, building this farming operation and everything. So what kind of first pushed you to say, okay, I'm going to go this deep into rum?
Well, I didn't intend to. Independent bottling, I got into that first of whiskey. It was a circumstance back in the early 80s, as a lot of these things are. Mm-hmm. I met a guy called Gordon Wright who was peddling independent whiskies at the time. Cadenhead, he was selling to me. I had a wine shop. And it was at that time that I thought, well, this is an interesting idea. Single malt whiskey was just taking off, and there were lots of venerable barrels appearing on the market, broking market, I hasten to add. And it was Gordon that sort of suggested that, you could get onto this distribution list if you played your cards right. And you could get offered these, gems. Really, there were the distilleries that no longer existed, ages that were venerable. They were distilled in a different era. There was less, it was more regional. It was all calmed down. They were better whiskeys. And that was really the catalyst for the whole single malt whiskey boom. At the time, 0.01% of whiskey was single malt. And so suddenly, as a result of economic circumstances, the big companies offloading, recalibrating, rebalancing their bulk stocks, they offloaded the ones that they'd shut down, distilleries, a decade, 15 years earlier. So this little gem of old whiskey stocks, cheap as chips, and it didn't take much to bottle them up, and a sort of underground movement started, which got validation when Diageo saw what was going on and jumped in with their own classic malts, which sort of validated the whole thing. And we are where we are now. So really, the pioneer, the prelude to all that was independent. This sort of armchair bottling, as it's bottling, often dismissively, returned, because basically anybody can do it anywhere.
Yeah, right.
But the trouble was, it seemed to me that there was no quality assessment. It was barrel by barrel, good and bad and ugly. And coming from the wine trade, you don't do single barrels. No one's ever seen a single barrel of Chateau Lafite or Chateau Latour. They don't do it because the fundamental principle is you put them together and it's better than the individual components. So why not try the same thing, with single malts? And that was the beginning of my independent bottling days. A company named after my maternal grandparents, Murray and McDavid.
Okay,
and that was great. That was fun. It was. You couldn't get it wrong. It was an amazing period, but very quickly it became clear that it was going to be unsustainable, because those early distillations from the 60s,
drying out,
were going to disappear.
Yeah,
and then what? Then you're left with the post-73 industrial distillation, when things were speeded up. Things were, fermentations were shortened to one day. Barrels, were recycled horrendously.
The dark ages, as we call them sometimes.
Well, but of course, in the defense of the big guys, they never knew that single malt whiskey was going to come. As far as they were concerned, single malt whiskey was merely a whiskey flavoring additive to, humdrum, banal, column still spirit.
Kind of like Highester rum.
So they didn't anticipate single malt whiskey taking off. In fact, they did everything to stop it, to keep it under the table. So production-wise, the 70s was not, just like music, was not a good time.
Not a fan of 70s music?
You're making enemies here, Mark. I don't know.
So
Jane
Mark's
has
to
something.
make enemies.
It's a disco. Well, okay, you disco if you want to. But the principle was that the 60s, that age of innocence, when things were more regional, everything was a little bit slower. It made better whiskey.
When did the rum bottling come into the picture for you then? That wasn't until much later, right?
Yeah, but the reason I explain that is because that's once it all the decent stuff dried up and you were left with the hodgepodge. As an independent bottler, you get to see everybody's dirty linen. So the whole industry issue, and the recycling of barrels, the excessive recycling of barrels, the abrogation of the maturation policy, the homogenization. And coming from Burgundy as a Burgundian fan in the 80s and 90s, which was a huge renaissance, precisely the post-war sort of socialist winemaking ended up with European wine lakes, the excessive agrochemical application that killed the soils and sacrificed terroir. at the altar of excessive fertilization. It was in the 80s and 90s that they basically said, look, this can't go on, and rediscovered the terroirs, applied for the first time modern winemaking, learned in Australia, learned in California, Roseworthy, Davis universities.
Yeah.
And they came back with modern winemaking. They threw out the folklore, historic, Jean-Pierre, and started making proper wine. Well, you just have to look now to see, just how successful that was, reducing the yields, concentrating on quality and hygiene. And I basically wanted to apply those principles and, not least the integration of wood, which is a very big subject. I experienced this over 20 years and I saw what happened. And so when I progressed to buying ultimately Bruichladdich Distillery, because I wanted to be in charge, I wanted to distill.
Right.
The old stuff shows what could be done. I'm not really happy with what's going on, So give me a go. Surely, the arrogance of it was, surely I can do a better job.
And why not, right? It can't be that hard.
So, that's why I started applying those ideas to the distillation at Bruichladdich, and then, more recently at Waterford. So having sort of realized that, that the good stuff had all gone by 2000, the early noughties. Somebody waved, I can't remember how, I got to say, barrels of rum. There were some European aged rums from defunct distilleries lying around, old maturation. And so basically we transferred the Murray McDavid idea to rum. And then we thought, okay, let's give it its own branding. So we started the Renegade Rum Company. And that was our independent bottling. And
were you surprised at the time to find rums like that? Like, did you have an awareness that those were there, or was it just kind of like, wow, I had no idea that rums of this quality existed?
Well, and that's an interesting point, because, if it took me the best part of 15 years to play with single malt whiskies, independent bottling work, the rum episode was even shorter. Because very quickly those stocks disappeared. Everybody ended up bottling the same stuff. There was no variety. There was no volume. There was, it was 2 barrels here, 3 barrels there. And frankly, it just got, 1, very boring. 2, it was evident that the maturation was not very good. And thirdly, there was this feeling that I had, which was, whilst you had this very expansive, broad flavor profile, much broader than you do with single malt, there was no depth. Something was missing. It was like hollow. That you got breadth, but no, and you're searching for, you're sort of trying to sift through your teeth. Where's the depth here? So even by putting these barrels together to try and make something more compelling, frankly, the quality of wood was so poor that we had to sort of do all sorts of decantings into different woods to try and get some interest going. And in the end, we gave up. We just thought, this is crazy.
Basically, you felt like you couldn't get what you wanted anymore.
Yeah. And I was very disappointed by what I was seeing. So I went on a peregrination. I went on a tour.
Good word.
Well, basically, not like your mate who did his 18 months. It was a sort of summer holiday thing, and you go ferreting around, nosing around, diving, fishing, whatever it was. But I went to Fiji and Mauritius and Jamaica and Cuba and down the islands, and sort of looking around to see what was there. I suppose you could argue, looking to see if there was a Bruichladdich to buy.
Sounds like a rum crusade.
Well,
Quest.
and a number of things occurred to me. Well, probably at the risk of offending everybody. Was I was appalled by what I discovered. Coming from the whiskey industry, to see a lot of very, very tired distilleries, ancient, poorly maintained, poorly managed machinery, and at a height. I was, to be honest, I was shocked. Obviously there's exceptions, and before everybody sort of throws brickbats at them.
I was going to say, wait, are you saying everywhere is bad?
But I mean, that was and so, well, first of all, I didn't find, I talked to a lot of people, and I was rather surprised at the difference between the rum industry and the professionalism of the whiskey industry. Of course, this all goes back. I mean, it's a much bigger subject. We could go on for bloody hours about this, but
right.
It's rum being that commodity product that was shipped back to Europe, and the branding and bottling and whatever happened, it was on a broker's market back in Europe. It was a commodity. There were very few distiller brand owners around.
That's really a more recent phenomenon, just in the last couple of decades. So
well, this is it. So I suppose that was the end of that cusp of that era, and I just felt pretty disenchanted by what I saw, and so it sort of dawned on me after about 10 years of doing this. Well, I suppose a bit less, 6 or 7 years. That if I wanted to do something, I was going to have to build it myself.
When you took over Bruichladdich, I know you had mentioned also that there was some equipment that was previously there, and I think Waterford, it was a brewery, but it also had something. Are you saying there was a real difference there in the rum distilleries versus those? Also,
well, good point. Well, Bruichladdich, interesting point. Bruichladdich was built in 1881, a Victorian distillery. It was purpose built. It wasn't a farm distillery adapted or whatever. It was purpose built as a single malt whiskey. It had a number of extraordinary concepts that were innovative, two of which were adopted by the rest of the industry. It was all anti-collapse valves, for example, on stills. But it was all gravity fed, and it was built around a courtyard, and it was built to use coal, and it was built to use imported barley, because the island, which at one point had 20 distilleries, but really, really small capacity, just didn't have enough local barley to grow. And so it required an economic change. It required the invention of steam puffer vessels, flat-bottomed vessels, commodity carrying, that could get to the island, beach on the sands in front of the distillery, be offloaded and unloaded. So the economics changed. Bruichladdich was built because of that economic development. Coal, much more effective than peat. And, of course, the scale of the distillery, because you had the ability to bring in the barley. So it was state-of-the-art 1881. And the testament to it was that by about 2000, when we bought it, well, it's solid cast iron engineering. It was relatively simple to get it back going again, because it was pretty basic machinery.
It sounds like it was kind of laid out and structured for the style of production that you wanted to bring there. And I guess what I'm hearing is that you had trouble finding a distillery for purchase that would be kind of set up to do this sort of farm to distillation.
Yeah, but as a lot of because this, we're throwing a lot of things. So here
we're going all over the place.
Yeah, fine. I don't mind. We can do this. The house don't have. But I just hope you don't get bored. But you need to go back to where rum starts, and I firmly believe that sort of rum's happy-go-lucky, carefree, nature, a reputation goes back to how it was made. That it was never a primary product; it was a byproduct, and we should never forget this because it explains a lot. It was a byproduct. So it was something for nothing. And sugar was the gold, refining was the process, and then, with the stuff left over, you made something, that you could drink in the bush and enjoy. It was never a primary thing. So sugar refineries, would have a distillery ultimately bolted on alongside. So actually building a distillery expressly to distill rum, was something much later.
Before we get too far into things, I know we're going to get into how you eventually ended up finding Grenada, that being kind of the place to do this. Jane, I don't want to just leave you all alone over there. I have to know,
all good.
when did you come into the picture? When did you sort of see this English whiskey guy coming and having this big dream? And like, what kind of caused you to be like, yes, like this is great. I believe in this and I'm going to, be part of it.
I think the exact moment is 2017. I am Grenadian, but I'm also German. So I came back to Grenada in 2017 is when I moved permanently to the island. And so I think it's been a bit of a relationship. I can't say, okay, this is the moment when it happened. It was an affair that grew slowly.
I can, Jay. I can.
Oh, can you?
John Adams on the plane.
It's true. Well, I met John Adams, a financial director at Waterford on the plane, and he was telling me about the project. And to be fair, I had, I think, a common reaction of being very skeptical. I was like, what are these people doing in Grenada? Also, as a small island, you're very protective of your islands. You're always wary of whoever comes and wants to do something because we have a string of failed projects. So that was 2017. And then I think John reached out sometime 2018. He said, Mark's going to come to the island. Would you like to meet him? And I thought, well, it doesn't harm. Let's see what happens. And then I think we met a few times. And I was saying, when Mark took me up to site, where the distillery is now located, we got there and there was just a big hole in the ground. But he showed me the wetlands that is adjacent. And it's just a magnificent space. And my background is not from the spirits. I consider myself a recent rum convert. My background's been more in an environmental realm. And so obviously I have a strong connection to, let's say, coastal environments, the shores, and I love that. And I just saw the space and I thought, wow, this is amazing. And I think going back to what Mark was saying earlier, the fact that essentially sugarcane is our star, right? That everything is built around extolling terroir or the natural environment of Grenada. I think that was a concept I've never heard of before. And I think what we found with Renegade and also with Kenko, the agricultural side, was that it's a geek's paradise, and I'm a geek.
Paradise.
There is something new to learn every single day. And I think these guys seemed a little bit crazy, but they also had something that was absolutely unique and remarkable. And there was a passion and a curiosity and a perseverance, an appetite for risk and faith to pull something off in the Caribbean that is, that's virtually unheard of. And when you do a project in the Caribbean or in Grenada, it's not for the faint-hearted. This was a difficult thing to do, right? And I think over the years now, so 2018, I think we had this pivotal meeting. And 2019, I started kind of dabbling a little bit. And by 2020, when the pandemic hit, I was full in. And so I've seen a team go from the initial pains of just getting construction to now building the operation and now actually having product in the market. And I have so much just admiration and respect, I think, for the hard craft and ingenuity that everybody had to pour from Mark and the investors being courageous enough to take a risk like that, from the team locally here who's made everything happen, implementing it. And I think from a Grenadian perspective, this is a lighthouse project. Not just, within the island, obviously also within the industry, but it sets a tone that we have not had before. And it's both in terms of, let's say, the agricultural aspect of it, because we have a bit of a love-hate relationship with agriculture. It's in our DNA through our plantation era and beyond that. But we have not seen anything in terms of the modernization or scale that we're working to now, or in the areas where we are located. It's breaking with the mold of any kind of development that we've seen prior. And I think that's something that excited me when I first started. It was a bit crazy and I was wary of it, I have to admit. But I think we've tapped into a potential and we're building something that is really quite unique. we're bringing something very different to the industry, but it has so many deeper layers to it, which makes this project complex and emotionally, appealing. And you just get sucked into it. Once you start, you can't really stop.
It seems like there's any number of interesting kind of challenges and problems for you to figure out and solve, which I can see the appeal in that. I'm interested in that process. And Mark, I can't remember which interview, but you made a reference to there were times where you thought the project was going to go bust, things like that. And then Jane, I'm sure maybe you saw some of that from
or felt some of it,
or felt some of it. What were kind of like some of the biggest challenges to overcome, or moments where you were like, man, I don't know if this is going to work? Take us through that from both of your perspectives a little bit.
Do you want to go first, Jane, or shall I?
You go ahead and I'll supplement.
I think there were 4 occasions where I was ready to get on a plane and leave, disheartened, disenfranchised, frustrated, fed up. And if it hadn't been for our MD here on Grenada, Graham Williams, I would have left. I mean, we started this project, remember, the very beginnings of it. I first came to Grenada in I think it was December 2014. And I came at the behest of my FD, John Adams, who knew I was getting frustrated finding a home, having decided I wanted to build a distillery. Where? Places were too dangerous. They carried guns. They were too far away. They were too difficult to get to. They were too developed. I wanted a quiet corner of the Caribbean. And John said, look, he had a university mate who had a holiday house in Grenada. And he said, why don't you come with me? So I went with him. And I can remember, as plane taxied into Maurice Bishop Airport, and I was looking out the window and I just thought, this is it. The green mountainous
sun was shining in the right light for you. It was angels singing.
Well, the houses, there wasn't too many of them, and there weren't big high-rise hotels, and and it just felt like this is it. And so we hired a car and we went round the island. And of course, the first thing we realized was there's no bloody sugarcane.
One problem.
Yeah. So this project, like any, anyone who's built a house, you spend a lot of time on the foundations and the money, and everything gets poured into that big hole in the ground, and it takes ages before it eventually gets to ground level, and then it's it goes up pretty quick, and that's sort of where we are at the moment at that period. But the first thing was I don't know what it is about Atlantic islands, but I seem to sort of, get attracted to them because I live on Islay on the west coast of Scotland,
right?
Where, we did Bruichladdich. Ireland to the south is in the Atlantic, another, wonderful, beautiful island. Mm-hmm. And then here we are in Grenada, another
just one side of the Atlantic to the other.
Yeah, it's
just a little hop, skip, and a jump.
It's a bit warmer. So I'm sort of used to how islands work. Now, I don't know if anybody topically has seen the Banshees of Inisherin.
It's on my list. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, you'll see it, from, it looks beautiful, it looks lovely, and the usual sort of, sort of slightly parochial thing. But if anybody's ever lived on a Hebridean or Irish West Coast island or Grenada, those island intensities come out. You spot them a mile away. A lot of people will just go straight over the top. But if you've lived on one and you understand how tiny little things take on enormous potential and bigger, more important things are meaningless. The whole thing is, upside down. And that's very much the essence of that film. You got a civil war going on, but it's not on the island. It's on the mainland. It's out there. Insular is the term for an island. Yeah. Everybody looks inwards. It's a hothouse, and that's very much what that film's about. So I felt that sort of having lived for my house, I've lived there almost 20 years now on Ireland. You sort of pick up that. So coming to Grenada and other islands, you sort of know how islands work.
Hopefully you never felt like chopping off any of your own fingers during this process.
No. Well, I felt like, so that's the first thing. And secondly, Grenada, we know, was one of the most fertile and productive islands around. But that got lost, for political reasons, after independence. Loss of markets, loss of land, everything reverting back to bush. So 40 years of agriculture sort of stopped dead of what once was an extremely fertile and productive island. It was French at the very beginning, 1700. It then was ceded to the Brits. It was then captured by the French. It was then ceded to the Brits. The Brits kept wanting it back because of the fertility of the island, and then the war came, the First World War, Second World War, and then the inability to maintain the dependencies, independence, and then the collapse of agriculture. In fact, there's an academic paper done which is entitled "How to Collapse an Industry," and it uses agriculture on Grenada, 1945 to 1983, as an example.
Yeah, I've seen a similar paper, not in terms of how the story happened, very different stories, but Puerto Rico, sugar industry, once thriving, you go there now, totally gone. So I feel that's kind of a process you see play out in different ways.
Sure, the collapse of sugar and other reasons. But this one was just like, woof, cut off, because of a political decision that, we don't want to do this anymore. It's slavery, it's colonial, it's past. We want nice, shiny, suits and offices and air conditioning. But that never sort of, really disenfranchised a lot of people, particularly the north, the poorer parts of the island, as opposed to the touristically dominated, south, west of the island. So the idea of islands didn't freak me out. The difficulties that engenders,
right.
Things. You have to go softly, and the sensibilities and the subtleties.
Sort of a mindset you have to have.
Well, yeah, I hadn't mentioned this, but this to anybody. But I remember shortly after reopening Bruichladdich, and I was visited by a guy I used to do wine tastings for. He worked at the Maida Vale music studios. He was a BBC, it was one of the BBC orchestras, and they had a little wine group. So after they'd done all their playing, for films or whatever it was, I'd go in and do a wine tasting for, the head cellist and the bass. Anyhow, he came to see me on Isla, and I remember I was sitting there with him, and he said, "How do the locals get on with you?" And okay, we've all
sounds like he had a certain expectation of what the response would be.
Well, but it's a very interesting question because people will all say, "Oh, I go on holiday. We went to a lovely island, and got on really well with the locals." No, you didn't. No, you didn't. That's the big fallacy. You would tolerate it.
Right? Yeah.
You're spending money. Yeah.
You're tolerated. It's not it's this complete sort of, ridiculous sort of attitude that you think, oh, well, I got on really well with them and I spent lots of money in this shop and I bought a Nicky Nacky New and, blah, blah, blah.
Right. I went to Hawaii and people said aloha to me. Yeah.
You would tolerate it. You would tolerate it. And of course, that's what, the thought of that question to me was, well, it's not that. It's the other way around. Really. It's more like, what do they make of you?
Right.
And as an interloper coming in, and now you've got a choice. You come in like an imperialist, and you march around, and you demand this, you demand that, and woe betide you if you do. You'll probably get your place burnt down, and that would be that. Or you go very softly, which needs a huge amount of courage and a huge amount of dedication, because you meet an inordinate amount of frustration. And I'll describe this to you. In my office at Bruichladdich, I had a wonderful French window that looked over Lochindal over towards Ireland. And it had a crack through it. I think a seagull had hit it and cracked the window. Mm. And shortly after I arrived, and I was sort of, this was all new to me. I was learning how to tread very carefully. And this guy, I heard the odd job man, and I called him in. I said, come in here, please.
Right.
And I think, could you please replace that window? And all right, so no problem. And he got out his tape measure and he measured the top, and he noted it down. He measured the side, noted it down. Around the bottom, noted it down. And all the fittings, he noticed, all the mates and everything, he noted it all down. I never saw him again. That was it. And you think, well, what was that all about? He's an employee of the company. His job is the odd job man. I've asked him to do a job. And of course, you realize that what you've done in your trying to be efficient was just piss the guy off. He put his heels in the ground. He thought, well, stop this. I'm not going to be told what to do. I'll go through this theatre of doing it and chuck the notebook away. And that's that. And it took me a couple of years, because a couple of years later, the same thing. I still had the crack through the glass. This time, the new odd job man, he came in and I put my arm around his shoulder and I walked him towards the window with the crack. And I stood there and I said, is this not the most magnificent view? Looking out over the sea. Isn't that fantastic? He said, yes, sir, it is. It's a fantastic view. The window was replaced the next day.
It's all in how you ask, right?
So, that's Gaeldom for you. But I mean, these are the sort of sensitivities, when you are a visitor, when you are a guest to an island where everybody's grown up together, everybody's lived with you, they've been to school together, they've loved together, they've killed together, you are merely, and you're never going to be one of these people. You don't have the back. The way I explained it to this BBC guy, I said, it's a bit like a soap opera, something like EastEnders, a soap opera. And you have been invited to be the special guest in the next filming, of the soap opera. Mm. And you turn up on stage and there you are, and there's the director, and you say, right, okay, where do you want me? And then you suddenly think, well, actually, I've never watched EastEnders.
Right.
I don't know what the history is. I don't know what the storylines are. I don't know what the characters do. I don't know who's banging who, who's going out with what.
I'm Googling it right now.
You have no idea because you haven't watched any of the previous episodes. They all know who you are, but you have no idea about those nuances, the loves, the passions, the frustrations. I ordered once some gravel on Isla there, and the lorry turned up with the gravel, and he refused to put it where I wanted him. I said, well, I'd like it dumped over there. He said, I'm not doing that. And he just dumped it where he was, and off he went. And I was absolutely
easily happened in Grenada too. Yep.
And it turned out that the driver of the lorry's family had a feud with the previous owner of the farm.
There you go.
30 years earlier.
You didn't watch that season of the show.
He was buggered if he was going to, cross that line, onto this guy's ground. Banshees of Inisherin. You'll see what I mean.
So Jane, at what point did you stop merely tolerating Mark? And
Awesome.
Have we gotten there yet? Yeah.
Not turning into a psychological podcast. No, coming back to your original question though about the issues, and I think Mark makes a good point though about island life and how island things operate, and it is a different pace. Especially any island has its own pace, and Grenada is particularly slow or fast depending on what your reference point is. And I think some of the challenges we've had was just the pace at which things can move to be implemented, right? Like, let's say, think of the pandemic. I mean, that was a slowdown for the entire world, but that brought everything to a grinding halt up at the distillery. And because everything is built bespoke for what we want to do here, we had to bring in machinery, kit, from all over the world, right, Mark? We had people coming in from South Africa, we've brought in machinery from Scotland, from Germany, from Brazil.
Right? Yeah.
Ireland, Brazil,
so all of
everything coming
the mill.
to this island.
Can I say the bloody mill? The mill has given us, so much to work with. And so I think the challenges that we faced here is just if something breaks because we're in a really harsh Atlantic climate, because also we operate on the east part of Grenada. It is the Atlantic. We're not on the cozy Caribbean west side. No. We are in the throes of it. So, right. So you get hit by sea spray, the wind, all of it. And things will just break down. So you constantly have to maintain it. Yeah. But getting a part, because everything is bespoke, it's not a question of, we are ordered on Amazon and it's here tomorrow. It means like, okay, we need to figure this out. It might take 3 weeks. You get it. It might not be the right part. It will take another 3 weeks. So your progress is much slower. But we are interfacing with the rest of the world, right? Yeah. Our product is an export product. It's not just for our little island where we can go at whatever pace we want. We want to push forward. And so I think that's been one of the big challenges for us from a construction phase, as a team, really getting to a point of making everything work, getting everything commissioned, running at a steady pace, and then also keeping pace with the rest of the world and being like, here, we've been talking about this amazing project, you've been following us, and then we have all these folks who are excited and like, where are you at? Where's the product? Right, Can you show us what you've been doing?
What's taking so long?
Patience.
Right?
Thank you.
Well, I can remember Devon coming up to me and saying, look, that they delivered one of the pieces of kit and there was something like 5 bolts short. And he said, what are we going to do? And I said, well, we'll go down to the shops and buy some more. I said, well, which shop do you go to? And he said, America.
Yeah, on point.
I mean, that is the and so when anything talking about the mill, and we could have seriously done without the shutdowns, the lockdowns. That caused us.
Yeah.
That almost caused our bankruptcy because we had a 9.5 tenths finished distillery. Right. We had to commission all the different bits. You don't build a distillery and you get that sort of instruction manual that says, thank you for buying your distillery. Step 1, take all the parts out of the box.
It's like an IKEA manual.
Yeah. Well, in the worst case, it may come in a language you don't speak,
that's right. Yeah. I was going to say, but at least you'd be able to check the bolts if they were there, if that was the case.
You got, that doesn't happen. So you need to commission. Commissioning is optimizing how these all work together. All the pulleys, all the conveyor belts, everything has to to match. And of course, our mill from Brazil. What language do they speak? Portuguese. Mm-hmm. How many Portuguese speakers are there? Half of it did via Google Translate. It was unbelievable. We had an organic Rankine cycle machine. Unit we bought from Germany. Fantastic German engineering. If only they'd tell you how it bloody works. Oh God! And then of course our extraordinary at the heart. The actual heart of this whole project is the biomass boiler. This whopping great boiler that came from South Africa. So of course, getting anybody from South Africa to Grenada, it's not exactly direct flights. You've got to go. So during COVID, we had to get these guys up to Paris, then from Paris to Martinique, and Martinique on a little plane. I mean, all the things we had to do.
Little tugboat.
Yeah, I think just the logistics for getting us off the ground is slightly unimaginable. It's wild, right? And then I think go ahead, Mark.
Sorry, I just made that because I sniffle this thing that just.
I can see the pain from this process. It's still very raw.
Well, because of course, people listening will say, "Oh, well, surely you did your SAT. Surely you did, all your, Well, of course we did. We did. The first thing we did was in 2015. We paid for a feasibility study with Booker Tate, the biggest sugar consultancy. I remember going to see them in England, a little quiet Oxfordshire village, and explaining to them what I wanted to do. And they thought I was stark staring mad. And that was the first thing. So we did a feasibility study, and the guy that did it for us was a chap called Duncan. He came out and he worked out that, yes, we would need about 150 acres of cane. If we could get 150 acres of cane, then it would be feasible to build a distillery. So it all hinged on that 150 acres. And obviously there was no cane on the island apart from 1 acre and 1.5 acres at
River Antoine.
River Antoine, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what would you need to do it? So to the next phase, after the feasibility study during 2015, was an implementation study. How would you actually make it happen? So that was the second study. It followed immediately on into 2016, January, February 2016, the implementation study, which is basically a box list that you tick of the things that you need to be able to build a distillery, to farm and do all that. And of course, one of the things that was on it, the thing that made me yelp was we needed a 500-ton crane.
Oh, crane.
To be able to lift, things up. So was there part of the the implementation? Was there a suitable crane on the island? And yes, there was. Was it for hire? Yes, it was. Does it work? Yes, it does. Brilliant. So roll on to during the construction. We've now pressed the button. We're now building the distillery. We're now implementing. We need the crane. It doesn't move.
Oh. You said, is there a crane on the island? The answer is yes.
Does it work?
Yes.
Does it move to where?
Does it move? No. It does an awful good lifting job where it is, but it can't move. So
I feel bad laughing right now, but
well, I mean, these were the challenges, and they were one after the other. I can't tell you. None of them were sort of incompetence, or it was just, if anything could go wrong, it did. Everything could break, and you had to get it. Well, fine. If you analyze what the issue was, brilliant. You could do that. We could do that pretty quick. But getting the replacement part or carrying the right parts that you needed, that all takes time to work out. Well, what is going to break? Because things do. It's engineering. Things do. So it's carrying the right spare parts. The things that take the longest period. To get. All this we had to work out. And it doesn't happen overnight.
I thought that's where you were going to pull Jane and others in, and you were going to say, look at this fine distillery that we're building, and then hope things magically happen, similar to the window.
Oh, gosh.
Not quite that simple, unfortunately, huh?
I was just going to say, I think the realities of logistics on islands, in particular Caribbean islands, is formidable. But one of the things, as Marcus said, in the end, we found solutions for everything. It just means you have to stop and think about it. And that's time that you have to invest. And there is. Absolutely. We had Devin, we had Graham, we had the teams that they worked with, and those guys did come through and make it happen in the end, right? So, we weathered it, but it took a lot.
And I think one of the key things that we did, which we didn't realize at the time, but would have a huge significance, was during the construction phase, when you've got the boiler engineers, you've got still engineers, you've got all these people there, is we employed local guys and girls at that time. We didn't employ them because they had we didn't say you got to have a degree in this or whatever. It was on aptitude. Are you interested? Are you really interested? These were all unemployed people in that rural area where 55, 60% youth unemployment. And we identified guys and we got them involved during the construction. And it was deliberate to get them trained up to see every nut, every bolt, how it all goes together. These guys hadn't built anything. These guys had never done anything like this. Who wants to be a boiler engineer? Well, you can. It was
hopefully that came with a book.
But But actually, and this it was very much Duncan Butler, our advisor. It was very much, and it was so relevant because when COVID hit, and the two most COVID-afflicted countries in the world were South Africa and Brazil. Neither of them could get to us, and we had all this stuff. We were hemorrhaging money like there was no tomorrow. We needed to get distilling. Well, the only reason we were able to do that was because those young lads were able to finish off where they started. So we were able eventually to actually start distilling in September 2019.
2020.
The distillery had taken us. It was meant to take a year to put into place, running the buildings and the installation at the same time. But then you were up against the cultural thing where the only builder in town was used to building hotels, and you build a hotel first, and then you bring in all the bits that you need afterwards. But we wanted them together at the same time. So this was just it just intellectually wasn't going to happen. So really we didn't start distilling in anger. By the time we finally got everything in place and optimized until January 2020. So we had a painful construction phase. Absolutely painful. And it's, I'm on record, blood, toil, sweat, and tears. Boy, by the liter. By the liter.
Well, we want to get talking about the rum and what you're actually distilling now that you got through all those trials and tribulations to get there. But I do want to take one step back before we do, and that is to talk about something you've both mentioned already, and that is terroir. So as we're talking about that, I wanted to ask a little bit to you both, but I'll start with Mark. You wrote an article titled "Why I Know Whiskey Terroir Exists," and you said in that, quote, "Terroir certainly isn't a feeling, a sense of place, an airy, fairy, vacuous phrase that wafts around the tourist trails." Well put. But what I want to ask is, what is it to you then?
Well, I mean, terroir, the problem with terroir is there's no English language or any other language, it's a French word, that adequately describes it. That's its problem. So therefore, it's perceived by some sort of highfalutin, fancy, concept, and therefore, they're scared of it. When in fact, there's nothing to be scared about. It's basically gardening, no more, no less. Terroir is, as the name implies, it's the sort of three-dimensional interaction between the soil, the microclimate, and the topography. It's very simple. Your mother, with her flower beds, that's terroir. She knows that sandy soils, are better for certain plants. South-facing walls are best for roses. Acidic soils are best for fuchsias and rhododendrons. That's terroir. Soft plants are going to get damaged by frost. That's terroir. It's what happens. Terroir is what happens to a plant, not a person, not a place, not a process. It's what happens to a plant. Microclimate, soil, and topography.
Yeah, so it's not a mystical art. It's agriculture.
No, not at all.
It's agriculture,
It's what we know. It's what we know it best applied to wine because they've sort of been exploiting it for longer. But as I said, it applies to farming, it applies to gardening. It's the same thing. We just don't call it that.
It's interesting because, like you said, that was one of the first things I thought about. I was thinking about this question this morning, and I was just like, the translation issue. There isn't just French word terroir, English word, X. There isn't a thing. And so people apply lots of different things to it. And I've heard other there's usually when people talk about it, I think some component of what you talked about, which is the land, the soil, the agriculture, as you were saying. But you also hear things like the people can be part of the terroir, the sort of air. I see you shaking your head already. So yeah, it's one of those terms that has so many different interpretations. And that's why, since it's such a major role in not just Renegade, but the other projects you've done, I wanted to establish kind of your perspective on it.
Well, and just because, as I said, it's a very simple idea. It's not nothing complicated really. It's this word which seems to cause the problem. Either fear or but it's equally exploited, and it will be massively exploited to the extent that it will be completely and utterly devalued by the big drinks players, the big industry players, because they're going to appropriate this term because it sounds quite sophisticated. It sounds like, and it means actually they don't have to do anything. And they can just talk about terroir of place, terroir of people, terroir of this, and people, oh, jolly good, jolly good. So unfortunately, it's a heavily loaded word. And I feel rather guilty that I'm going to be responsible for it being destroyed. Because our industry, whether it's rum or whiskey, the spirits, the drinks industry is a very powerful marketing industry.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And, anything, if they see something that they think they can get mileage from, they're going to appropriate. It's like a magpie. They're going to take it. And this is ripe for it.
But also, if you want to go back to, yes, the concept is not difficult to understand, but let's say if you want to create causality or trace it, this is where it becomes complex again.
That's where the controversy comes in. Yeah.
Well, I don't know even that the controversy is the question of, how scientific and diligent do you want to be about the process? And it's complex, right? Like your climate is a complex phenomenon. The soil has its whole thing. Then you have the topography. If you want to map all of that, it's a lot of data points. It's a lot of data points for something that in some ways is not essential for most industry partners to do, right? And we do it to some extent. And I think we're not, or let's say go with grapes, compare it to sugarcane. With grape varieties, if you look into scientific research, you will see much more work that has been done between how certain soils, how the aspects, how that is going to affect certain varieties, and then further on the flavor profile. None of that has been done for sugarcane in the same extent. If you talk about sugarcane and the quality of sugarcane, it's about yield, disease resistance, drought resistance. It's all about how much sugarcane can you extract from the land as opposed to what kind of interesting flavor are you going to get from it, right?
Because
so it's a
it
very
was grown
different,
for sugar,
Yeah, it was grown for sugar. It's a different utilitarian approach. And where our attention is, that's also to some extent where the research goes. And so we're striking up with something that hasn't got a depth of research behind it. Doesn't mean it's not because it's not existent or because it's too difficult to understand. It's just you have to allocate resources to map and track all those different parameters. And that system, the knowledge generation system, that is complex. That takes time.
Right.
We know, we can already see there's loads of differences between our farms, between the sugarcane varieties, but it's going to take us years to say there's a consistent trend. Yeah, exactly.
Mark just held up 5 different bottles of
impressively
what I presume is rum. Yeah.
Impressively, yes.
I want to transition to how. Will, can I just
add to that? Because I think that's very important. Terroir, to me, again, it goes back to the industry, the power of the drinks industry, the Diageos, the Pernod Ricards, these companies that make $3-4 billion a year in profit. They are marketing companies. People forget this. They're all just, yes, they have production side, but 90% of it is marketing.
Right.
It's spinning a yarn, telling you why you should drink this, why you should drink that, put hairs in your chest, whatever.
Yeah.
We can't compete with this. As an independent company, my marketing is the production. So for me, it's not about a vacuous production and then spinning a yarn.
Right.
It's about the actual production itself, how you actually make it. That is the Renegade story. How you actually make it.
Yeah.
That is our narrative. That is our story. That is what it's all about.
Yeah.
So terroir is merely, for us, a building block.
Okay.
It's a building block. Think of a wall, and it's all these, or behind me, perhaps the tiles on the floor. It is every single one of those is a building block.
Are you also you're maybe fighting a perception out there, whether it's people in Diageo or just general people, that because rum or whiskey is distilled as opposed to like wine, that the terroir is less of an influence?
Well, that's just ignorance. That's just outright ignorance, and of course you have to wonder why. And again, certainly with whiskey and with Bruichladdich, I was attacked by all these talking heads who basically had to undermine the concept of terroir because it directly challenges the narrative of those big companies. Those big companies are marketing a product, a manufactured product made up of ingredients brought from third parties from other side of the world, brought together, assembled, and then sent away. And yet the marketing is all about, the monarch of the glen and where the eagle soars and the babbling brooks and burns and the romance and that's the marketing. Yeah. And yet their primary ingredient is coming from the other side of the world, or Ukraine or Australia. That doesn't fit the narrative. So, here you got some, guy talking about, specific, the precision of place, of terroir here, local. And of course that goes, that begs the question, well, what do you do? And they don't like that question. Yeah. So you shoot the messenger. And of course, with this airy fairy term, it's very easy to do. Well, fine. Right. Now, a lot of those people that attacked us at the beginning of Bruichladdich, I mean, several of those have now left the industry. They've retired, and they readily admit it was all part of all's fair in love and war. It's
nothing personal.
Nothing personal. They had an agenda, and it was to denounce anything. It was Goebbels like in approach. Shoot the messenger. Fine. Now, what we had to do at Waterford when we started that from scratch, we had the chance to put everything in place right from the beginning. We're dealing with barley again, the best barley in the world, which is why I went to Ireland, for no other reason. The fortune of coming across the Waterford brewery, a techno marvel of stainless steel and all the gadgets I'd ever wanted. Some people said it's like, Willy Wonka, the chocolate factory. Absolutely right. It was for me, everything that I'd seen in Burgundy on a very small scale. Here it was, thermoregulation and pneumatic presses and all these things that you would never in a month of Sundays find in a distillery. Well, here it was. It was a brewery. And that's, of course, what distilling, everybody's been told it's all about the stills. And look at those shiny stills. Look at the shiny stills. Don't look anywhere. Look at the shiny still. It's actually about fermentation. That's really what it's about. And distilling is merely schoolboy chemistry. That is very, very easy to do. So it's not alchemy. It's not sort of mysterious. It's very simple. It's how greedy are you going to be with the middle cut? The greedier you are, the less pure the spirit's going to be. The shape of the still, well, we all know, since, for 140 years, what the optimum still shape is. That's fine. And then the third thing is how fast do you run the middle cut? If you're really in a race to get it over and done with as quickly as possible, well, you got to produce thin spirit. If you slow it right down, you're going to produce more viscous spirit. Yeah. Now, more or less, that's distilling. I don't mean to disparage distillers out there, but it isn't what it's been cracked up to be, this mysterious, alchemic thing. No, unfortunately, the boring bit, because you can't really see it, happens inside a tank. It's the fermentation. It's how you get at those original flavor compounds. And this is what terroir, this is where we're going here. It's where does that flavor originate? Yeah. Now, you've heard as well as I have, 80% of a whiskey's flavor comes from the wood. Well, that's bollocks. It's absolute nonsense. I mean, if it was the case, we wouldn't bother with barley. We wouldn't bother with it. We would just put water in a barrel and you'd end up with whiskey. I mean, the stupidity of that phrase, and yet it's bandied around willy-nilly as a soundbite, detracts to the fact that actually whiskey's flavor comes from barley, just as cane rum comes from sugarcane. And those flavor compounds appear in the grain and are nurtured by the microclimate, the soil. Is it, water retentive? Is it sort of drought prone, et cetera, et cetera? And so those flavor compounds appear in the grain or in the cane. Now, this is the important thing. They are immutable. You cannot destroy them. They are there in the cane and they'll be there in your bottle. They're not going anywhere. What happens in the barrel? Yeah, sure. There's micro-oxygenation through the wood, which somehow gives us an impression of maturation. We're not quite sure of the mechanism yet, but I can tell you we're working on it because I'm curious to know. Yeah. But what we do know is, for example, and this is a paper that's coming out. This is our second paper that's coming out in the spring, later in the spring, is we know that terroir exists because we've done the research with Scotland's leading whiskey laboratory, with the Ministry of Agriculture in Ireland, and with Oregon State University's Dr. Dustin Herb. Over 3 years, we did a project to find out once and for all, does terroir exist? Because of my critics from the industry always saying, yes, but there's no scientific evidence to prove it. It's going to get destroyed. The effects are going to, even if it was there in the grain, it's not going to be there in the spirit because we do too many nasty things to it. Conveniently forgetting about cognac and the fact that it's a cooked wine based on terroir. But, let's not go there. So when we did this research, we discovered that nobody had actually proven that terroir exists. The French had never done it. They just take it for granted. Terroir to them is what 1,000 years of monastic observation has observed.
They came up with the word for it, so...
Yeah, and then enshrined in law, the Appellation Contrôlée law system. So they never bothered. The market decides whether it's the 1855 Bordeaux classification, or whether it's, the market price of Romani Conti versus Latache, two vineyards side by side. One's, 10,000 quid a bottle. The other's about, why? Same grape, same manufacture, but, the value of one is 10 times the value of the other. The other side of the wall, it's 100 times less. Why? Well, this is terroir. This is the market deciding that that's worth more than that because it tastes better, because the microclimate, the soil there produces a different result to over here. So when we did this study, it took 3 years to do it. We discovered a number of things. Well, two things essentially. First of all, that there are an extraordinary 2,000 flavor compounds. 2,000. And of the major flavor compounds, 60% of them are influenced by where it grows, terroir. So terroir is a thing. So I don't care what anybody says, whatever, it exists. It's a thing. This is peer-reviewed, accepted by Food magazine, and it's there to be seen. Terroir, as we all know, and we all knew all along, exists. All right, so that we can put that to bed.
Okay.
What we discovered, which was slightly surprising, was that the variety of barley made no difference. And when we looked into it a bit further, we discovered that there was a reason for this. That from that Annus Horribilis in 1973, that era of industrialization, the propagation of barleys in Europe were, as Jane said earlier, were to do with disease resistance, to do with field yield, distillation yield, climate adaptability, low straw, so they don't fall over in the wind, but never for flavor. In fact, it's worse. All they did for 50 years was replicate exactly the same flavor, because the two original parents from which all modern distilling barley is developed were cousins. They were genetically too similar. And so all that's happened is it's been replicated. I mean, it's a tragedy, 50 years. So we've had to go back before 73, back into the 60s, back into 1900, back to 1870, back to the Middle Ages to find out what the hell were the flavors that we've lost. Now, that's whiskey. Now, wind forward to rum, to cane.
Cane varietals.
Which is why, I'm not interested in molasses. You don't go build a distillery like we've done if you want to distill molasses, because 90% or so of rum is made from those little blue barrels. From a centralized commodity supply. You pick up the phone, you order the barrels, they turn up, you distill it, you've got rum. It can happen anywhere in the world. It happens on Ireland. There's a guy distilling on Ireland. So this is a side of rum which is easy come, easy go. You get into it very, very straightforwardly. You call up those. Everybody's starting with the same substrate, more or less. I have no interest in that. I'm sure there's a lot of very good rums out there made this way. Fine, good. I am interested in sugarcane because it's a plant. It is going to be subject and influenced by the microclimate, the soil, and the topography. So coming here to Grenada, where you have a volcanic island, okay? So, you got sedimentary rocks that have been raised up from above the sea, and then you've got volcanic activity on top of that. And then you've got 2 million years of tropical weathering to create all those gullies and ravines, and 2 million years of alluvial soils being washed down onto the plains, and colluvial soils being brought down from the steep sides of the volcanoes, rendering the upper slopes very thin and therefore not water retentive at all, down to the bottom where it accumulates the lighter sediments, the thinner elements, to create deep soils that are clay rich, which are water retentive, and where the plants, the cane, grows like bilio because it's got that terroir which enables that to happen. So very basically, if you plant cane on the top of a volcano and you plant cane at the bottom of the volcano, one at the bottom is going to be very verdant, very lush, and very tall and fast growing, but perhaps less bricks because it's putting that energy into growth. Whereas at the top, where the soil has been washed away, the roots have to go deeper into the mineral substructure of the subsoil and bedrock, drawing up minerals. But it's drought prone. It's weathered by the wind. The evapotranspiration is very high, so it's losing all its moisture. It's creating more bricks as a result, more sugar concentration. But the poor old plant is stunted. Its leaves are yellow. The edges get turned white by the prevailing trade winds. It is the most unpropitious place to grow anything. But boy, when you distill it, fuck me, it produces really, really interesting spirit. Now, we sort of know this concept from Burgundy. I've followed it. I've watched it for 20, 30 years. I even at one point owned a little bit of Grand Cru vineyard there. The principle's the same. The Appellation Contrôlée system. Just look at any of those vineyard maps and you'll see that the Grand Crus occupy that base of the concave slope. The actual plain itself is the ordinary Bourgogne Rouge or Bourgogne Blanc, the base level generic product. And then the Premier Crus are around the steep up slopes of the concave. And then again at the top, where it's flattened out, you get the village wines. So it's not a new idea. There's plenty of evidence. What we've done is actually mapped it out flavor wise. That's why I'm doing it, because I want to know what those flavors are. And I can tell you with our volcano, that example of Lake Antoine, which is a volcanic crater lake. The difference between the top, the exposed top, and the protected bottom is more or less the difference between a very nervous, tight, elegant, stony mineral style versus what I call, the fat cigar and armchair at the bottom, where you've got a big, fat, bloated, That's the difference. If you get the imagery,
right?
You've got that tightness from the top, and you've got that fatness and opulence at the bottom. That's more or less what we are discovering. We talked about Willy Wonka. This is just amazing to me, because if you taste this distillate from a specific farm, from a specific terroir within the farm, from a specific field within the terroir within the farm, and you stand there and you taste the spirit, and you're holding the soil in your hands, and you're seeing where it was born. That is amazing. Yeah. And then you go down and you try the same thing at the other end and compare the differences. What we're finding is these terroir differences are much greater than I anticipated. So each of the 12 farms, soon to be 14, we have subdivided. Jane's helped greatly in this, and Duncan Butler, our Kane. Do you remember the guy that helped us at the very beginning? Yes. He now is in charge of our agriculture. He loved it. He loved it so much he came and stayed. So we've mapped out, and you can see it on the cane code on our website for each of these whiskey, these rums, whiskey rum. You can see how we've mapped out the obvious terroirs that are there, because once you've cleaned it all away, all the bush that's grown up, over the last 30, 40 years, and you see the ground, and you see the soil analyses that we've done, that James helped with, and you see the topography. We've mapped it all out. So each of those farms, on average, has about 5 different observable terroirs.
And these are areas of the farm where the soil is literally different, basically.
Yeah, we're not just the soil. Remember, it's not just the soil. It's microclimate and topography.
Right.
So an example of that would be Lake Anton, the Crater Lake. Guess what? It's round.
Yeah.
It's round, okay? So we've got a north, we've got an east, and we've got a south.
And those are going to be very different. Yeah.
So north-facing, south-facing. Guess what? Upper is going to be different to lower. Guess what? And of course, what we're finding on the ground, and you may find, for example, New Bacalet is right by the ring, the road that runs round the island. See it from, you don't have to get out of the car. There it is. It's like a Roman amphitheater. It faces due south, like a satellite dish.
Yeah.
It's protected by hills all around it. So it's protected from the drying effect of the wind. It's a sun trap, a veritable sun trap. Now, you follow it every day. You drive, and you see the cane getting paler and paler and drier and drier, and you think, oh God, it's going to die. And then we harvest it. And I remember seeing that bull for the first time when it was still, rough and bush ridden. And you just think that is a classic terroir. Got to plant that one up. And then you've got little river valleys, which are nicely protected, alluvial bases, fantastic. Or you've got Old Bacalet or Hope, both of which part of some of the residues of the old estates, of which there were roughly 45, between two rivers, flat as a pancake. It's clay rich. It's all that alluvial. This cane grows like mad. It's fantastic. Or to one side, you've got the slope with all those pyroclastic rocks that have been exploded up, over the years, like whopping great mortars. It's a terroir paradise. And we have built a distillery precisely to exploit those terroir differences. It's just that I never knew just how different they were going to be.
And how diverse this would be. And I think just to put that into context and wrap it up, what Mark has said, Grenada is a very small island, so often when we travel and we talk about it, like, can there be so much difference in such a small place?
Right,
but if you really want to picture it, Grenada isn't flat. It's part of the Windward Islands, as Mark said, it's a volcanic origin. So you just have from one little bay to another, a lot of environmental micro differences.
Yeah.
So you could be down here right now. I can see there's some rain coming, and I know that rain is going up the hills, but it's not ever going to hit me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is how differentiated those different spaces are in places where we grow. And so I think that's the exciting part from our end where it comes to terroir. That wasn't a concept, again, that would have been explored in Grenada. And we've been playing with it unbeknownst because, let's say we see it in the cocoa industry here as well. People do that with dark chocolate.
Right.
And so there's, again, this thing where, okay, maybe it's controversial from the idea that, we're dealing with a distillate at the end of the day. But terroir it goes across anything you work with and you work with the raw material. And I think Grenada for us, maybe, Mark, I'm going to throw this question back down to you. It came up earlier, why Grenada? And I get that question from Grenadians. Why would we do it here? What does Grenada have to offer? This little speck, this little rock in the middle of nowhere. And I think the diversity that Mark has described, that is the answer. And it's an undiscovered gem to some extent. And also there's not been any Grenadian rum. Every distillery in the field that we have has a completely different process. And no other distillery has explored the natural environment and the raw material, the sugarcane, in the way that we do.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for listening to another episode of the Rumcast. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, if you've gotten any bottles of Renegade Rum and want to share your thoughts and impressions on those releases, we'd love to hear all about that. You can always email us at host@rumcast.com, host@rumcast.com. Also, send in your funny, weirdly placed rum bottles.
We want to see
we'd love to see more of those. Or stories if you don't have pictures. That's fine too. You can send them to us via email, like I said. John, they can also find us on social media. Where can they find us there?
That's right. We're on social media at Instagram at The Rumcast. Also Facebook. We have our Facebook group at The Rumcast. And Twitter. We post things to Twitter. We don't do as much engagement there, but at least it's there if you're looking for the episodes. And of course, you can go to our website and listen as well. So www.rumcast.com, where we house all of that information. And we've actually had a few requests, Will, for us to list our favorites from last year, 2022, and other years. So we're going to get that soon. We're going to have a new page on the website to post that information for reference for people. So we heard you, we're listening, and thank you for that. And we'll get that up soon. But yeah, anytime you have anything you want to let us know or anything about Renegade, of course, part 2 is coming soon.
1 week.
So part 2 will be out soon. So you may want to hold any questions related to any of their aging stuff, which we're going to talk about in the next part. But yeah, other than that, let us know what's going on with Renegade, or let us know about your odd bottle placements, and we're happy to hear that and see how that goes. So I think that's it. Will, what else we got?
Just hey, say hello if you see us at Miami Rum Congress.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this weekend and it's Saturday, we will literally be there right now. So come say hi. It'd be great to hang out and chat with all of you.
But if we don't see you there, until next time, we'll see you on the podcast for part 2.
See you then.